to the webinar on Visual Reporter. Visual Reporter is one of our generic reporting tools that Donman provides for everyone. We have large numbers of reports that do all sorts of various things, but there's never enough. And so with Visual Reporter, or I'll call it VisRep for short, we have a large number or ability to produce any report that we want within certain reasons. What we'll be covering today is basically how to drive VisRep. Trying to produce a report is a little bit like driving a car to a destination. You can be taught how to drive a car, but you still need to know where to go to get to your destination. And the same thing is very true with VisRep. I can teach you today how to use VisRep, but to some extent you will need to know where the information is stored within Donman, and that's to do with which files record what bits of information. Now, most of what you will do in your life using Donman will probably be based around 3 or 4 or maybe 5 major files. So there's not really a lot that you're going to need for most of your reports. However, there may be the odd report that uses information that's from perhaps a less used part of the system, and you might then need our help to actually guide you as to where that information is. So we won't actually be covering that today.
Sorry to interrupt you for a moment there, Murray. We've got a number of people who are unable to hear you at the moment, so we might need to just pause for a moment and just check the voice. You're on the telephone, aren't you, Murray?
Yes.
You've joined on the phone? Yep. I'm not sure why people can't hear you, but I will continue. We'll keep going, and I'll try and help people offline. But there's a number of people who I think have joined via the VoIP and who can't hear us. So if we can just not go through too much information while I help these people, we'll give you a couple of seconds to get that going. Sorry, Murray.
Okay.
If you just want to just go through your introduction, and then we'll keep going.
All right. Now, essentially, with VisRep, there are a number of different steps to producing a report. There are 4, in fact, and if you're familiar with either of our previous reporter or our simplified reporter, the steps are essentially the same. The first step we have to do is to identify the file that we're going to use, and that's where you need to know where the data is that you're trying to report on. Typically, you will probably be using the donor file, which is all the information that you would see on the 2 donor screens when you go into donor entry. So anything that you see there is on the donor file. You will probably also wish to use the donation file, which is a record of every single donation that's ever been made on the system. You might also look at the campaign file, the pledge file, and there may be other files that you might want to use. Once you've worked out which file it is you're going to base your report on, the second step is choosing the output order. So, for instance, you might want a list of donors in alphabetical order, or you might want it in from the highest donation down to the lowest donation. So that's just the order that the report will output the information in. The third step is, out of that file, which of those records do you actually want in your report? So you might want every single donor, or you might only want your individual donors, or donors that have given more than $10,000, or whatever it is. You need to choose or tell VisRep which reports or which records you want in your report. And then the final step is, for each of those records that you have chosen to output, what bits of information or fields do you want to output into your report? So if we're doing a report on, say, the donor file, you might want their donor number, their title, first name, surname, maybe some address details, maybe some other information from some of the codes. So no matter which of the reporter things we're using, but in our case today, Visual Reporter, we need to run through all of those 4 steps. Now, the next panel I've got is going to be a very simple representation of the data that's in Donman. Now, there's a lot of files there, and I've only included the major ones, but as I mentioned before, most of the ones that you're likely to ever want to report on are, first of all, in the center, the master donor file, donations, campaign, and possibly pledge, and the rest of the others you will probably only use from time to time. And you can see I've got these little arrows there, which later on when we go through running some reports, you'll see these links or relationships between files can become very handy for you. All right, now at this stage what we're going to do is we're going to actually swap into donor management. So here we have our start menu, and to access VisRep, what we need to do is we go to the reports menu, and then over on the left we have a number of sub-menus that we can go to, and we're going to go to the reporter menu. Now in my case I've got this one that says Visual Reporter. Yours might say Visual Report Writer, it might say VisRep. These are the ones you may or may not have, that's fine. Let's go into Visual Reporter. Now for some of you, we will get this thing called the wizard. The wizard is something that we can get rid of, or if you want to use it, there is an option up here where we can request the wizard. The wizard is just a bit of a hand holder to help you generate the basics of a report. So if you're unfamiliar with VisRep, then the wizard is probably not a bad place to start with. What we're going to do is we're going to go through those 4 steps, and essentially the wizard will guide us through those steps. As I mentioned before, the first step is to select the file that we want to report on. So typically this is going to be the file that contains the information that we want to output in our report. Now what we're going to do is we're going to start off by generating a very simple report. It's going to be a report of our donors who have a donor type of I for individual. So it's a fairly straightforward report. So whereabouts is the information that we want? Of course it's in our donor file. So I just simply click on donors and then I go next. Now what order would I like my report to come out in? Well, we can do it in a number of different orders here, and from our drop-down list there you can see there's quite a few choices there. Now depending on which file we're reporting on, you will get more or less or fewer options there depending on what indexes are available to that. So let's do this one in surname order. You can see here I've got a checkbox. So if I wanted the Z's to come out before the A's, I could simply click on reverse sort order, and then the Z's would be the first ones to come out, and it would work its way through then to all the way through to the A's. The next step, having chosen our order, is to select the particular records that we want. And we do that by setting a number of criteria. We have this new criterion button here, and by clicking on that, I get a new line here. This first of all comes up with donors.record number. The record number is of no use to us, it's purely an internal number, so I can click in there, and then if I click on the drop-down list there, you can see, if I scroll through these, a list of all of the fields that are available to me from the donor record. So essentially these are all of the fields that are on those 2 donor screens, plus there's 1 or 2 extras that aren't shown there. Now I said that I wanted a list of my donor type of I for individual. Now I can scroll through this and perhaps try and find it, and it shouldn't be too far down. There it is right there. However, if you're having trouble finding it, you can simply click where it says field, and it's now sorted those in alphabetical order. So now as I go through them, I can look until I can find donor type, which is there, and I go OK. Now it's automatically come up with a comparison of equals. So this is going to compare donor type with the value that I place in the end here. Now I need to point out at this stage that this comparison is going to be case sensitive. So if I type I in lowercase, it won't find any because all of the codes in Donman are in fact uppercase. So I could type a capital I there as such, and that could be my criteria. Now that works fine. However, sometimes where you've got codes and you're not really sure what they are, sometimes it's helpful to be able to get a list of those codes. In this case, you will see at the end, we've got a question mark. Now, if I click on the question mark, what it's done is it's gone through all of my donors and it's looked at their donor type and given me a list of those donor types here, and in brackets it's actually telling me how many records have those particular codes. So in this case I can simply click I and go OK, and that's my first criteria. So if the only people that I wanted were donor type of I, and that was all, that's all I need to put in at this stage. So I'm now going to go next, and this will bring up the final stage, which is where we tell it for each of those donor type or donor records that we've chosen, what information do we want to output in our report. Now the donor number is always a good one to output. Now I can click on these one by one and then click on the add button, and they will actually appear not in the order that I ticked them, but in the order that they appear in the file. If I want them to appear in my order, what I do is I double click. So if I double click donor number, you will now see over on the right hand side donors.donor number. And then I can take something like the title, the first name, the surname, and in there I might sort alphabetically at this stage. I'm going to look for donation total, which is available to you on the second donor screen, and it's the total amount as recorded by the system. So every time they make a donation, it simply adds that to the donation total. So that is their overall total of donations. Having done that, I can go next, and then I simply go finish, and there's my report. So it started off with Mr. J. Be Good, who's given 58,000, John and Jane Be Good, etc., etc. I can maximize this, and so there is my report. So that's page 1, and up in the corner here, you can see that there's actually a second page, so there's the rest of my donors. So that's a very simple report at this stage. Now, having done that, if I go back to Data tab here, you'll see across the top I'm currently in the Preview tab. If I go back to Data, you should be able to see effectively what I have produced as a result of going through the wizard. So first of all, you can see that my file is donors. You can see I've chosen the surname, first name order. My criteria says the donor type equals I, and you can actually see that in a bit more plain English down here. And then over here, you can see the fields that I have chosen to output. Now, let's suppose, as well as outputting the individuals for donor type of I, that we also output donor type of P. Now, I can add a new criterion here, and you'll see that it says AND here. In this column, we've got a choice of AND or, and I'll explain that just shortly. Again, instead of recnum, I'm going to choose donor type. And again, in here, I can choose, in this case, P. And you can see that there are 19 of those. Now, what you have to remember is when VisRep is choosing whether or not to pick a record to output, it does that one at a time. Now, in English, I have said I want to output all my donor types and donor types of I and my donor type of P. But when VisRep looks at a record, it says, and you can see down here, is the donor type I and is the donor type P? Now, if both of those are true, it would pick that particular record. But clearly, a donor record cannot be both donor type of I and donor type P. So when we specify the criteria for selection, in this case, what we have to say is, I don't want both of those to be true. I want one to be true or the other one to be true. So in this case, I can change that to or, and now it will pick a record if it's donor type of I or donor type of P. Now, I'm not currently outputting the donor type, so let me add the donor type to the list so we can see what we actually get. So I'm just going down to the bottom here, and again, just double-clicking it, and it's now added donor type over on the right-hand side. And I can now go back to Preview, And there you can see now the first three are donor type of P, and they weren't coming up before. Then we've got a few that are donor type of I, another P, etc., etc. So again, when you are doing these criteria, you need to look at it from the point of view of the computer. It's looking at one record at a time to determine whether that record should be included in the report. Now, we have a number of different criteria there. I have said equals I. If we were doing some other form of criterion, from the drop-down list there, you can see there's a few. There's equals, which we've just looked at. So we've got not equal. So obviously, if you wanted a list of all the ones that weren't donor type of I, then you would say donor type is not equal to I. If we're looking at values or dates, we can say less than or equal to, greater than or equal to. And a little bit later when we do another report, we'll actually use that on some of the date fields. If you're looking for some text within a field, you can use contains or you can use doesn't contain. Now that can be quite useful if you're looking for a small bit of text, such as a little bit later on we might run a report to say, give me every donor record that contains the word school. Now it's not equal to school, but it might be Fred Blogg's School Incorporated or something like that. So it doesn't start with school, it's just somewhere within that text. Now bearing in mind again, this will be case sensitive. So if someone's typed school in all uppercase and you do a search for contains with school with just a capital S, it's not going to find it. And then the last one that we've got here is starts with. So there are a number of criteria that we can use there. Now sometimes we have to be a little bit careful as well. If we do include other criteria, sometimes we have to bracket our criteria down here. There's one other thing that I need to point out too. Here, where I've said donor type is equal to I, we could change that. Instead of comparing it to a fixed value, in this case of I, at the end there, I've just got to move something out of the way here, sorry. At the end of this column here, we can also look at a drop-down list and we can actually compare our donor type field to another field. Now it probably doesn't make sense perhaps to do that with the donor type, but let's change our criteria. Now these X's at the end there will get rid of those criteria. So what I'm going to do now, if I can, not quite sure why I can't get back to my new criterion button. What I'm going to do is I'm going to compare the last donation with the donation before that. So from here there is a field called donation last, and I'm going to say I only want those people whose last donation was greater than their previous donation. So again in here I can use that drop-down list, and there's a field called donation second last. Oops, too far. No, I'll need to sort that. Okay, there it is, donation second last. Now if someone's given their only one donation, their second last donation will be 0, and therefore they will always come up. So what I will do is I will add one further criteria, and that's going to be that the donation count is greater than 1. There we go, donation count greater than, I'll just type a 1 there. Okay, now in order to, I guess, show what we've got as a result of that, I'm going to output the donation last and second last. So there's second last and donation last is there. So for now I go to my preview, you can see here that their second last donation was 59 and then the last donation was 65. Here we've got 20 and 40, $3 up to 2. So that facility allows you to compare fields, which, like in this case, is very useful to be able to do something along those lines. Now, at this stage, we've got a number of columns there. You can see in this surname column that this one's being truncated. It's not quite big enough. I can go up here and you can see I've got that two-headed arrow. I can just drag that. Oh, I need a bit more for this one. That's all right. And for the first name, I can do the same sort of thing. So we can stretch these fields to increase the size. Now, every time I stretch or make a change to that, it effectively rebuilds the report. Now, in my case, I've only got a small number of donors there, and it's a fairly quick report to run. But if it was a report where perhaps if it was going through hundreds of thousands of donation records, and it might only find the first one after it's been a minute, every time I stretch one of those fields, it's going to start the report again, and you're going to have to wait a minute before it brings up even the first record before it can go, oh no, I need to stretch that a bit longer. So this button up the top here, pause, can be very useful. What you can do is you can let the report run till you get a bit of a sample of data, click on pause, and then make whatever changes you need in terms of the formatting of that report, stretching columns and that type of stuff. And then once you've done, you can unpause it, and it will then go and start the report again and hopefully complete that. Just to point out something down the bottom here, you can see it processed 177 records of 177, and it found 24. So I'm basically using a small set of data, so that's why it's coming up fairly quickly for me. Now we can do other things as well with this. I can move fields around, so if I want the donation total to be over here, I can just drag that there, and there it is. Same sort of thing, I can move any of those things around. I'll just move that back after donor type. We can also combine fields. So at the moment we have a separate field for title, one for first name and one for surname. If I want to combine those, which would be a logical thing to do, what I can do is I can right-click on title, select title, and then merge column title. So at the moment over on the right-hand side I've got title, but if I add first name and surname, they will now become one combined field. At the moment, it's still going to be called title, so I'll just change that to name, and I go OK, and there we have it. Now, it's gone back to the same length as the original one there, so I'll just stretch that again, and still not quite enough. No, still not enough, and there we have it. So it certainly looks a lot better if you're going to print this off. We can sort of shrink columns as well if we want to take up less room. Okay. All right. Now, what we've got here is our report. If that's all you're after, we have a print button here, and we can print that off, and that will just go to whatever printer that you want. And unlike a lot of the reports in Donman, you can actually choose which of your defined printers you can send that to. We've generated this report, very simple report, but let's suppose this was the report that you wanted to run fairly regularly. What we can do is we can actually save the report definition by going up to File here and Save Report Format As, and I'll call it Test. Now I've already got one called Test, so I'm just going to overwrite this one. Okay, so that hasn't saved my results. It's saved the definition of that report, so which records, etc., etc. If I exit from Visual Reporter now, I can go back in. Now, at this stage, I've got the wizard come up, so I'm just going to cancel that. And from the File menu up the top, I'm just going to say Open Report Format, and I can choose my test report. It's brought up the same definitions that I created. So again, I can simply go to the preview. I'll just maximize this again, and because no data has changed, it brings up the same people. But if you were to bring that up in a month's time, then of course if some of those people have given again or others have, you will get a different report. So it's quite simple to do that. I had to cancel the wizard. Up the top here under Options and then Settings, I can tell it not to run the wizard at startup, and then I wouldn't have had to cancel it. Okay, now that's nice. we can do that quite easily. But if I get out of here and say yes to that, I'll say no, I don't need to change anything there. You'll notice that I've put on my menu here, and this can go on any menu, Murray's test report. And that's actually going to run that same report, except it doesn't go through the criteria, it just simply brings it up on the screen. I'll just jump out of here again. We can also, if you want, set up, before I continue, you would need our help to set that up, because you would need a password that enables you to go into menu definition, and then we could tell you what to put on your menu. Another way of doing something similar would be to set up a shortcut on your desktop that basically ran VisRep and told it to run that test report. And by doing that, again, it would just run VisRep and automatically show you the results. Another way that's only just been introduced in version 7.5.07, which came out about a month ago, is the user menu. Now, at this stage on my user menu, I only have menu definition. But if I go up to options, there's now an option here to add a VisRep saved report to my user menu. So if I click on that, I can choose from my drop-down list here my file, which was called test, and it's called VisRep report test. Well, let me change that to, Murray's upgrade report or something like that. So if I go save now, you can see, oops, I can't spell, or I can't type, but there's my report. So if I click on that, there it is. There's my same report. So if you've got version 7.5.07, and the other thing is you have to have the user menu enabled for you, but once you've got that, you can add as many of these options as you like, and they will just be for you. They will not appear on anybody else's user menu. So you can personalize that with the reports that you run on a regular basis. That thing that I did there brought up the report and displayed it on the screen. We do also have options where, rather than doing that, and then if you want saving the report as a text file, you can actually have those options put onto these menus as well. Now that's brought up something that I haven't yet spoken about. What if we, rather than seeing this as a report, what if we want to actually output that to a file? For those of you who joined the webinar last month when we spoke about the pivot tables, I very quickly produced a report in VisRep and then output that information to a text file that I was then able to import into Excel. To do that, we simply go up to File and we say Save Report Data as text. So by default, it's going to be tab-separated file, which for Excel is probably the best format. It's automatically going to have a header record, and because I've saved this report format under the name of test, by default, the file name has come up as test. I'll leave it as that. That's going to output that file to the working directory, which is going to be DM work for most of you. So I just go OK, override yes, and it was very quick, but you saw a little bar graph that go across there as it was actually running that report, and it's now created that file called test.txt, and I could then open that up in Excel and do some sort of calculations based on that. If you noticed, there was options there under that to do it as a comma-separated file, which you may wish to do, but tab-separated or comma-separated, both of those can be imported into Excel, or both can actually be used as merged data files in doing some sort of word merge. Excuse me. There was another option there as well, and you'll see Save as Selection File. So if you just want a list of the donor numbers, you can do that. Now, when you do that in some of the other files, it will automatically change the output order to become donor number. So you might find that it doesn't come out the way that you wanted it, but that's the limitation. In this case, it probably wouldn't have mattered in the donor file, but in pretty much any other file, it will rechange that order back to donor number. When we looked at those options for running that report directly, such as from the menu, from your user menu, or from the desktop, you can actually add options there so that rather than producing it on the screen like we're seeing it here, it will actually output it to either a comma delimited file, a tab delimited file, or a selection file. And basically it's just by adding a /t, we'll output it as a tab delimited file. /tc will output a comma delimited file, and /ts will output a selection file. This can be quite useful if you just want to generate a particular report every month. You don't want it to bring it up on the screen and then go in and say file, say report data as text. You could just click on that option on the menu and it would go away and reproduce that file for you. Now I haven't got an example of that, so if you need some help, you might need to perhaps give us a call with regard to that. But it's a little bit more specialised and you can always get it from this report anyway. Okay, just looking at my notes here. All right, now when we ran this report, the order that I chose here was surname order. And you can see we've got quite a number of orders there, but these are only the ones that are automatically maintained by the system. We can, if we like, create our own index in whatever order that we like. So I've clicked on Create New Index. So let's suppose we want it in donation total order. Okay, so I'll just sort that. So donation total order, maybe that's all I want. So I'll just go OK to that. And that's now going to build a temporary index. Now if we save this report away, when you come to run this again next time, it will ask you if you wish to regenerate that report. Let's have a look at it first though. And so you can see now that's from lowest to highest donation total. If I save this report again, so I'm just going to save the report format over the top of the old one, I'll exit and maybe I'll run this. You can see now it says the report has a temporary index. Would you like to recreate this index? So in order to run it in that same order, you would need to say yes. Now again, because I've got a small file, that's almost instantaneous. But depending on what file and how many records you've got, that might actually take a little while. But if you want that report in that order, that's one way to do it. Of course, the alternative is you could just output it in any order, include that field, put it into an Excel spreadsheet, and resort it there. Okay. Now, let's suppose we want to find out what the total of all of these donation totals are. We're going to use this Design tab. That's probably the easiest way to do it, although we can do the same things from the Preview tab. If I go to Design tab, you can see here from the drop-down list under the column, there's a number of options there. So I'm going to select donation total, and I'm going to say I want to total the column. Now you'll notice by default it's actually going to do a count, and I don't want a count of those, I want the sum. So now when I go back to my preview, you can see automatically it's done that sum for me. I can do the same thing for each of these columns, but let's also count how many people we've got. So maybe I'll pick a different column, and it probably doesn't matter which one. I'll just count the donor numbers. So I'll go total column, and when I go back, you can see there are 24 records that I've output, and I've still got my total there. We can also do subtotals. Let's change the report a little bit. So I'm going to go back to here. I'll get rid of my criteria completely, and I'll add a new one. And I'll say that the criteria is that the postcode when I get to it, postcode, I'll say greater than or equal to 3,000, and I'll also put in an and postcode, I'll say less than or equal to $3,999. Okay, so if I go to my preview, I'm now getting a whole lot. I probably don't need donation last, donation, or any of that stuff. And because it's still in donation total order, I'm still getting those people with 0. Let's get rid of some of these fields. So I don't want second last, so I can just simply highlight it and click on remove. Donation last, I don't want either. Who knows about it? I'll leave that one in there. Now, it's brought my report up, and of course, all right, so we've found a total of 85. So I'd need to go to the second page to see my last one. So again, I've got a total of 85. This time my totals are 208,000. Let's add the postcode. So down here, I can just go down to postcode. Oops, wrong one. So I'll just get rid of position. So back to my report. And you can see the postcodes are in all sorts of different orders. If I want to get a subtotal by postcode, then essentially I need to order my report in postcode order. So again, I go back to donors. I'll get rid of this and change that order to postcode. So now when I go in, here are my postcodes for 3,000. I've got a whole lot of different ones, and then there's quite a few there for 3,071. So in order to get a snapshot or a subtotal, and in fact in this case a sub count for each postcode, I can again go to design. I will pick the postcode as my field, and I'm going to say group on column. So there are two options here, show values in header or show value in column. So if we look at the first one of these, you can see that there's a header for postcode 3000 and then the two records. Here's the count, number 2, and a lovely total of 0. Let's go down to 3071. Okay, so here we've got a total of 5, as it says there, with a total of 58,000. So we're now getting our subtotals by postcode. Now, actually, one other thing that I can point out at this stage, if I shrink that, some of these are being cut off. Either in design or under name, I can select that column, which was name, and I can say that I want to, wrap lines. So now if I go back, where I've got some of these ones, not sure, here we go, Mrs. Bittersweet. That one's actually been split over the 2 lines because it wouldn't quite fit. So that's also another useful option. Now, as I said, there were 2 ways of presenting those subtotals. In this case, we've got the header. If I go back to design, go to postcode, I'll change it this time for values in column. And when I go back, there's no header. We've now got the postcode in the last column there the way it was. So just a little bit of options for you there. Now, sometimes you don't actually want to see all of the data for each one. You only want to see the actual subtotals. So to do that, we can go to design, and up here we've got this option for totals only. So that will not show us individual records. It now, as you can see, shows you just the totals for each of those particular postcodes. Okay. And here you might, if that were the case, you'd probably move this across to here and get rid of some of these other columns that you perhaps don't want. Okay. Now, let's change things up a bit. Let's go in and we'll create a completely new report. Now, the last one we did was based around the donor file. Let's do one based on the donation file. So I'm going to go in here, and you'll see at the top there the 4 most useful files: donors, donation, campaign, and pledge, but all of the rest are in this scrollable list. So let's pick donation. Let's do this in donation date order, and let's pick all donations from last month. So my criterion, I'm going to pick donation date. I'm going to say it's greater than or equal to, and in here I can put in the 1st of the 9th, 2012. I'll also add a second criteria so that it only does it for that month and not just anything since that month. So donation date, this time I'm going to go less than or equal. I'm going to go to the 30th of the 9th, 2012. Okay, so what do I want to output? Well, I want to output the donor number. So I'm actually going to resort this in the order that it appears in the file by clicking on number. I want the donor number, the amount, campaign code, donation dates, maybe the pay method, receipt number, whatever it is that I want. And then I can simply go, and there's my report, nice and quick, in donation date order, and that's fine. Now let's suppose you wanted to run this every month for the previous month. So if you have a series of end of month reports that you do on the previous month, what you could do is you could save this report, and let me save this report format as, I'll call it monthly. Okay, so next month you could come along and open that report up. You would come back into the data tab, and you would then have to go and say, well, actually I want that the 1st of the 10th, you know, and I want that to become the 31st of the 10th. Well, that's all well and good if you're happy to do that, but there's a better way of doing it. We have these things called date variables, and if I click on F at the end there, it gives you a list of some of those variables and what you can do. You can see here that T represents today's date, and for any of these things you can add or subtract any number of days. You've got F is the start of the financial year, whichever financial year you are in, or Y is the start of the current year. You've got M represents the start of the current month, or if you go M1 through to M12, they represent January, February, all the way through to December. W is the start of the current week. Now, when I go into here, if I change that to M, down the bottom you can see here that it says date equals the 1st of the 10th, 2012, because M represents the start of the current month. Well, I don't want that. I actually want the start of last month. So I can actually subtract 1 month from that by going M minus M1. And when I do that, down the bottom, you can now see, based on today's date, that it's going to use that criteria as the 1st of the 9th, 2012. In my end date, if I go M, again you can see 1st of the 10th, I'm just going to subtract 1 day from the beginning of that month, or this month, and you can see that's now doing the 30th of the 9th. So if I save this criteria as it is now, when I come in November and run this, I won't have to change anything at all. It will automatically give me the results for October. And so by playing around with those criteria, you can quite often get the results that you're after without having to change anything. And therefore, if you put this on one of your menus and you click on it, it just brings up the report automatically, or it produces that file of information for you automatically without having to modify that report. So if you have a manager or somebody who really is not too au fait with VisRep or even Donman, you might be able to put something on their desktop, or if you get them to log into Donman, you can perhaps put it on their user menu so they can just click on those things and produce the results without even having to worry about changing the report. So that just makes it a lot simpler for you to create those ongoing type reports. Now, up until now, everything that we've done has been based on the file that we're looking at. The fields that we've output, in this case, have all been from donation. In our previous report, they were all from the donor file. And our criteria up here is also only based on the current file that we're looking at, which is donation. Now, from that little option I have here, you can see that donations are linked back to the donor file. Every donation links back to one and only one donor record, and it also links to one and only one campaign. So we can actually, in our criteria for selecting donors, or in this case donations, or in our output fields, we can actually make use of those links and select or output information from any of those linked files. So let's suppose from my report, and how many did I get this way? So here you can see that I got 1,093 records from last month. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say, yes, but I only want donations that came from individuals. So I can add a new criteria here. Up the top here, you can see it's got the word donation because that's the file that these fields are in. But from the drop-down list there, I can select donors. And I can now sort that. Oops. And I can look for donor type. And I can do what I did before, equals, put a capital I there. So now, the only donations that I'm going to get were donations from individuals. And down here, where I'm outputting the files, again, I can select the donors file, and I can now output the donor type. And when we look at our results, you can see now it's only found 552 instead of 1,000 odd that it did before, and the donor type is I. Another useful thing along a similar sort of lines is quite often people have a number of campaigns that are all under one campaign group. Now, the donation file links to one and only one campaign record. So I can select donations based on the campaign group that they're part of, and here you can see campaign group. So let me just output that, and so we can now see the different campaign groups. So I could, if I wanted to, perhaps just select those campaigns, or sorry, those donations that were part of the event 11B campaign group. Okay, so you can make use of those links or those relationships between those various files. So in the case of the donation file, when we look at those files that it links to donors. You can pretty much forget about alumni unless you're a university or school. Campaign, and if you're looking at in memoriam records, you can look at that next of kin or relative record as well. Probably most of the time you look at campaign and donors only. Okay. Now, let's go to our results here. We can do a number of things in terms of formatting. We can create or modify the fonts. So if I click on fonts, in fact, before I do that, let me go to design. I'm going to give a title for it. So I'll call it Murray's Test Report. And when I go back, you'll see it says Murray's Test Report. But, you know, I like my name a little bit bigger than that. So what I can do is I can go to fonts, and for the title, I can say, no, I want something a bit bigger. So let's say, I don't know what basketball looks like. No, well, I'll go Arial Black. I'll go 18, and I'll go OK. So you can see what it's going to look like there, fairly big. And we can change any of these headers here as well. We can also change the color. So let's make that red. I go OK, I go OK, my report's in red, or at least the title is. I can move this down a little bit here, and I can make room for a logo or something like that. So under Design, I can click on Has Image. I'll say I only want it on my first page, and from here I can go and find a report, a file. In this case, I'm going to pick the ASI logo, and then when I go Preview, oops, that looks a bit too big for me, so I'll shrink that down and move it over a bit and shrink it a bit more. So I can now fit that on the page, and I can move that up again. It's probably a little bit out of kilter there. That probably looks a little bit better. But if I go to my page 2, I don't have that logo, so it's only going to appear on that page. Now, if you set up a number of these different fonts into, you know, the way that you like it, what you can do once you've done that is you can click on Save Style, save that away under any different number of style names, and when you create a new report, you simply go to Apply Style, and you can choose which of those styles. So if I select Murray, there you can see it's applied a different style to it. So I've got different headings and things like that, or different fonts for those. Okay, so quite a large number of different things that you can do. Now, we're pretty much out of time at this stage. There are a number of other things that can actually be done. Let me just check my list. All right. One of the other things that we're not going to cover today is being able to actually import into VisRep text files. So at the moment, when we've actually looked at any of the files to report on, they have all been files within the Donman system, all the ones that you're probably fairly familiar with. However, if you have a file that may have come from Donman, or it might have come from somewhere completely different, as a text file and probably tab or comma delimited, you will be able to import that file into Donman, into VisRep, and actually run that report. Okay, now there's probably a number of things that I've missed out along the way, and I apologize for that. But the idea of today was a bit of an overview of just the sorts of things that you can do. So hopefully you might have learned some new facilities in there, or perhaps become a little bit more comfortable. I would suggest that you should go into VisRep at any time and try and produce any report. You cannot do any damage. The worst thing you could do would be to, say, print something and you print off, 100 pages, but you can't change anything in VisRep. It is purely for reporting purposes only. So by all means, go in there, have a play. If you don't get the results, change it. Try and work out what you've done wrong. Now, I apologize. There is one last thing that I do need to point out. If I say the donor type must be equal to P as well, again, I'll just change that to OR, and I'll change this to donor type. Oh, there it is there. And I'll say equal to my P. And when I do that, down the bottom here, you can see it's got this string containing all of the criteria that I've got, but basically in English. Now, it actually works its way across there. So because we actually wanted to do this or this first, what we need to do is put that in brackets here. So I have to put a bracket at the beginning of donor type equals I, and at the end of that. That will force it to do that calculation or that evaluation first, and then if that's true, it will then say, is this also true, and is that also true, and that's fine. If it wasn't that, it would look at the first three and say, are they true, and it would output it, or if the donor type was P, it would out them irrespective of those earlier criteria. And so you do need to make use of those brackets. If I were to change anything at all up here, if I change that to Q, you'll see that it loses the brackets, so you then need to put those back. So you do have to be a little bit careful when you're doing those ORs, but if you're just doing ands, this and that, that's fine. You can put them all there together. Okay, so at this stage it's now 3 o'clock local time. We've been going for an hour. I don't know how many of you are still there or how many of you have fallen asleep, but I'm going to hand this back over now to Marla, who can now post any questions that have been given.
Thanks, Murray. There's no sleepers. I'm checking on them. Don't worry. There's a few questions that have been logged along the way.
Okay.
And I'll just reiterate to everyone that if they do have any questions, they can log them on the question pane on that control panel, which you can open with the little grab tab arrow, which is a little orange arrow on the right-hand side of your screen. So I'll just get started, Murray, if we can. The first question
Sure.
was from Melinda, and it was about halfway through your session. And when you were changing the size of the table, she said, are you able to double-click on the columns to stretch it to the correct size like you can in Excel rather than dragging?
Yes, you can to a limited extent. When you go to the preview screen, the report starts to run, and at the time that you double-click, however far the report has progressed at that particular point in time, it will use the information up until there. Now with a spreadsheet, you've got all the information there, so it knows the whole thing, whereas in VisRep, it only knows what it's reported on at that stage. So let me give this a try, and I hope this works. If I double-click on that, well actually let me shrink one of these a bit too far. And if I double-click that, I'm obviously not doing something right. You should be able to do that. I know it has worked, but perhaps I'm doing something wrong. But well, I might rephrase my question and say, sorry, Melinda, it doesn't look like you can. I'll need to just double-check why that's not actually working at this stage. But yes, okay. The idea is you should be able to, but it's not working at this stage.
Okay, thanks, Murray. And a question from Christina was, can VisRep assist in finding a donation that has been banked but not to a ledger code?
Yes. Basically what you would have to do is, in our criteria here, let's say we keep the date range there, so let's say we're looking for one last month. I'll just get rid of these two criteria here, and all I'd need to do is, in here, the field is called chart account code, and I can just say equals blank. And I don't know whether there will be any. No. So it found 0 in this case, but that's all that you would need to do.
Okay, thanks, Murray. The next question, let me just find it. There's a few coming through, so
okay.
Bear with us. A couple of questions as well around whether we're recording today's webcast. We are, and it will be available on our website in the next few weeks. So we'll be sure to let you know via our newsletter and on the website. Now, Murray, Sonia's asking, can you repeat the bit about how you save the reports onto your user menu? Able to
sure.
Quickly run through that again.
Yep, I'll just jump out of here for the moment. Oops, so I want that. Okay, so let me get rid of that. All right, so you're normally in the Start menu, or you might be in Main menu. First of all, you have to click, no, actually you don't even have to go there. Up in Options, you click on Options, and you can see you've got this Add a VisRep Saved Report to your user menu. So I just click on that, and it brings up this screen, and this is where I need to select the particular option I want. So I did test, but let me pick monthly instead, and then I'll just change this and say, my monthly report, and I just click on Save. Now, as I mentioned before, you need to be on version 7.5.07. Otherwise, you won't have that option. But once you've upgraded to that, and as I mentioned before, the upgrade went out about a month ago. So if you haven't got 7.5.07, then perhaps you should talk to your administrator about getting that updated. Having got that there, I can now click on it, and there's my report. So very nice and simple. There are some other options as well that you can do in here. Is it in here? No, I've forgotten. You can actually add, sorry, off the top of my head I've forgotten where I can add other things in there. You can put like lines between these and sort of group them around, but anyway, that's how we add it to the user menu.
Thanks, Murray. For a question from Bobby was, when you have a large number of columns and more than what fits on one page, is there an easy way to change the column order, the column's order?
As in if it goes off the side of the page. Well, you can, oh no, you can't do it in here anymore. Let me add a few columns. So I'll take some things I haven't got. And then maybe I'll go to Donors File and pick a few others. So if I go to my preview, okay, I might have to get back to Bobby on that one. I don't know where my extra fields have gone.
I'll just make a note that we do get a log of all of the questions, so if there's anything that we've not answered, we can follow that offline as well, follow that up.
Sure. All right. Well, yeah, sorry, Bobby, I'll have to get back to you on that one.
There's a question from Antonia, which I'll go to if that's all right, Murray.
Sure.
Yep, Antonia's asking, do you have to use the brackets if you order the query in the correct order? For instance, all donors equals P or I was at the top of the query rather than at the end, in your example.
I think it works its way from left to right. So was that or that? Again, I can't give you a definitive answer. You've got a much greater chance by explicitly putting the brackets there. You're safe. I think you probably need to do a little bit of a test. You probably are okay, but I would advise you to always put it in the brackets, because just because that's the way that it evaluates it now doesn't mean that that's always the way it's going to evaluate in the future. There may be reasons why later on they choose to run it from right to left or in some other order. So if it's something that is fairly critical, and it probably would be in most cases, I would suggest always putting the brackets there anyway, just so that there's no doubt as to the order that it happens in. I don't think we've actually ever said this is how it works, and it might work quite well for the next year or two, but some change might then stop those things from working and giving you the incorrect results.
And a question from Melinda was, are you able to edit the report once it has been saved to the user menu? For instance, edit the fields in the data.
Yes, well basically, like at the moment I've come in here via the user menu. I'll just do that again. So I've come into here. It's come up in the preview, but I simply go back to data. I can change whatever I like here, add extra fields. I can change the criteria. If I want to save that away, for next time I can go save report format, or if it's just for that particular session, I can run it without actually saving those changes away. So yes, the answer is definitely.
Okay, thanks Murray. That seems to be the end of the questions for today. We'll just give people a couple more moments just in case they do want to pose another question, but I'll just run through the promo for next month, which is our next webcast is on Wednesday the 21st of November at 2 o'clock. That's Eastern Standard, Daylight Savings Time, so that's Melbourne or Sydney time. And that's at 2 o'clock, and it's an overview of the new features in Donman, which Murray mentioned that the latest release came out about a month ago, so we'll go through some of those new features then. So we'll send you an email about that shortly, and you can also look on our website for a recording of all of our webcasts up until now. So if you're looking for one that you missed the last couple of months, they're all up to date at this stage, and we'll be posting today's webcast there shortly as well. Still no more questions, Murray, so we might wrap it up there. Was there anything else you needed to add before we finish up?
Not that I can think of. I'm sure as soon as we finish I'll remember.
So the resources on VisRep, is there any documentation or that people can refer to?
Well, it's all part of the manual. Some of the more esoteric ones probably aren't mentioned in a great deal there, but if it should be in the manual. The manual is available on the Donman community site. I think is that how they refer to it, Marla?
Yes, so they get from where they go to get tech support as well. The Donman community on the ASI website as opposed to the Donman website. Yep. Right.
It is a fairly big manual. It's like 40 or 50 megabytes, but it will be the more up-to-date. And I think it's from about 6 months ago, and there haven't been a huge number of changes in VisRep recently, so the information that's in there should be pretty much up-to-date.
Okay. Just one last question, Murray, from Sonia, and she's saying she doesn't currently have access to the user menu. How does she change that access? Okay, you would need to get your Donman administrator to do that. When they set you up as a user, there's a tick box there that you can tick to say access user menu, and if they tick that, then you will have access to that. So if they don't know how to do that, or if you're not sure who your administrator is, you probably need to log an SMR, and we can help you do that. By default, when users were set up, in the past, it never used to set that tick by default, so you actually had to explicitly tick that. From now on, with 7.5.07, any new user
will automatically have that box ticked, and so they will automatically get access to the user menu, and then the administrator can then remove that if they don't want them to gain access to that menu.
Okay. Thank you, Murray, and thank you everybody for joining us today, and my apologies for our earlier audio issues. I hope that it didn't inconvenience you too much. Thank you for joining us today, and Murray, thank you for a very informative webcast. I think everyone will agree that they got a lot out of today's topic. And again, as I mentioned, our next webcast is on the 21st of November, so we look forward to you joining us then. Thank you again, and please do, if you do have any further questions, please contact us on info_donman.net.au or feel free to give us a call. That concludes our webcast for today. Thank you, Murray, and thank you, everybody. Goodbye.